Hello and welcome to the New School HR podcast. This is episode 7 of season 2, titled Disciplinary. So here we are. We have landed on disciplinary, which is what, apparently, if you're in HR, all you ever do, followed by sacking people or making people redundant. That's for season 3. But anyway, so what I realized is that doing season 2, there is quite a lot of repetition, but I'm actually going to keep that going because the idea is that season 2, you can click into whichever episode you want, and therefore it might not be repetitive if you skipped investigations, which was the last episode. So anyway, let's just jump straight into it. So the first thing to talk about is the pack. And this is the pack that will be used within the disciplinary hearing. So this is what's been passed on from the investigation team to the disciplinary team. Now, depending on your setup, you as the HR person may be involved all the way throughout the process. So that pack will be very familiar to you. But in other scenarios, you may not be, and you may have to hand it over, and that pack then becomes at the mercy of someone else. So it's very important that your pack is as easy to read as possible. It's as to the point as possible. Now, I've seen many packs that are, well over sort of 30, 40 pages. And you have the investigation summary. Now, as we discussed in the last episode, so if you listen to the previous episode, I don't remember what point it was, but the investigation summary, it was the last point. Investigation summary was the last point. So if you listen to that, that gives a bit of background about what you should sort of do in terms of organizing it and whatnot. So the first thing to say is that if the disciplinary hearing has been booked, we know that we have to give a minimum of 48 hours notice. Now, for me, I like to try and give more than that. And people might say, well, why? You only have to give 48 hours. If it's a serious case, I prefer that the individual has enough time to interpret what is there, understand it, and make their own questions as well. So, actually, hold on, let me just go. I don't even have anything about the invite. So look, I do want to touch on the invite letter. So for me, the invite letter should be straight and to the point. I don't want War and Peace on there. I don't want to talk about the investigation. I just want to talk about, you've been invited to a disciplinary hearing. This is who it's with, and this is the reasons why. Key thing for me is listing what those allegation categories sit under. So is it gross misconduct? Is it just misconduct? Whatever it is. Obviously, it could be an absence disciplinary, so it'll be whatever that trigger or point is, So it's important that you keep these things. I just keep it factual. So, I've seen invite letters which have paragraphs for the allegation. Let's just keep the allegation to what it is. The whole point of the hearing is to actually discuss the allegations and go for any challenges there. So for me, I always send the pack with the invite. And like I was saying, I prefer the person has the time to digest what is in front of them. In some instances, if they haven't been invited to an investigation, they may not know that it's a gross misconduct disciplinary until they get the invite letter. I would expect that you tell them that in the investigation, to be fair, but you never know. So the letter obviously also outlines that there is a potential to lose their job if they're on a final stage warning or it's a gross misconduct. So it's important that they have all the evidence there. I always make sure that I review the pack ahead of discussing it with the disciplinary manager. So say like I'm doing the disciplinary for someone else or have no knowledge of it and the disciplinary manager has no knowledge of it. I prefer that we review it separately in the first instance, just to purely gather our own thoughts and our own interpretations of it. And then obviously we get together and review the pack. Because, the managers know more from a process point of view. And there's often times that they pick out things that, we in HR just wouldn't have an awareness of unless we've been in the business for a number of years or if we've been operational within the same business. The other thing to mention is if you see any gaps, So you got a pack, and you may have done a similar sort of disciplinary, for the same thing. There may have been a consideration or something that you know of, and the other person hasn't factored in. So I would ask those questions to the investigation team. I think if you review the pack in good time, you can ask further questions or reasoning if it's not clear why something has or hasn't been done. It then gives you the opportunity, when you have all of this, to think about the kind of questions you want to ask. So usually the investigation will ask the questions anyway, but for me, I always want to know the person's version of events. And there may be a time between the investigation and the disciplinary where the individual has had the opportunity to think about what has happened, and maybe I'm not going to say they lied in the investigation, but maybe they give a different version of events because actually they know where they are. If they've got a representative, maybe the representative has advised them to come with something different. So for me, it's always about asking the version of events. And I think, when you've got, and look, it depends who's doing each meeting, I guess. If it's in department, then it's in department. But when you have a external disciplinary manager, which can be a benefit sometimes, you might find different things out. So always have your questions ready, but at the same time, be prepared to know that you might get different answers to what you was expecting. That's it for part 1. So I'm going to touch on the representative piece. So they are entitled to a representative. That can be a fellow employee, or it could be a union representative. Now, if your business does not recognize a union themselves, an individual can still be part of a union independently, and they can still have someone represent them. So I have seen some companies suggest that the individual has to provide proof of a membership to the union, and I've seen companies that just don't require proof. They just want proof that the union representative is in fact a union representative. So I don't really know what the right or wrong answer is there, to be honest. In the retail place I worked in, they had to provide, well, we kind of knew, I guess, because we administered if they was in the union or not, but we always used to cross-check that they were actually in the union. But coming out of that, I've not seen anyone cross-check that, have to provide proof that they're in the union. It's the employee's responsibility to source the representative. It's not ours. I have seen instances where people have asked us to get the rep. Well, surely if we get the rep, then it's a bit of match fixing, isn't it? So I make it very clear. If you want a representative, that's up to you. The employee must also provide the pack to the representative to review. So that's not our responsibility. We don't need to print off a copy for them. We don't need to send them a copy by email. However, if it's communicating via email and there's attachments and stuff, if I have the union rep's email address, I'll just send it to them myself. I'm quite easy with the union. I don't, even though they don't like me. Well, they didn't in the first company I worked at anyway. I guess here they don't really know me, but I'm not against the union. I've had good experiences, bad experiences, so I'm always going to allow anything to make the process easier, to make us look like we're encouraging the support network for the employee, because that's the reality of it. Is, I know I sounded a bit sarcastic when I said that, but we should really be doing that. Solicitors as representatives. So I did actually learn that a solicitor can be a representative for someone who is at risk of losing their professional career. So for example, a GP, a surgeon, a lawyer, they can have a solicitor if it means that they would no longer be allowed to work in the field that they work in. But a role that's a driver would not they wouldn't be entitled to a solicitor as rep. So yeah, I mean, it's not like I've ever worked with those kind of roles that I listed that we need a solicitor, but I had basically an incident which I was involved in, and the guy wanted a solicitor as rep, and that's when I found out that that's not allowed. The other thing to say when we're talking about who's allowed to be a rep, there's a bit of a balance. So under 18s, they're allowed to have family members as representatives, but over 18s are not. However, what I would urge people to think about is if there's someone with a disability or if there's a mental impairment, I would consider allowing that person to have a family representative with them. So I remember one of the quite sensitive cases I had a couple of years back. Well, that was a complete fucking mess. But they wanted to have their brother as a representative, and the person from HR who originally had the case said no. And I actually allowed it because he was suffering with depression, anxiety, etc. And he had issues with the people, with the business, and I just felt like if we could give him that support mechanism, then why not? So we did. And the other instance I have done is if you have someone who's not maybe in that situation, so that there isn't a clear reason, but maybe, as in there's not a disability or anything, but maybe there is an issue with the company or something, then I have allowed representatives from family to, well, they've not been in the meeting, but they've been outside. So I've allowed them to sit outside, and then if there's an adjournment, or even if the employee wants to adjourn, then they can actually talk to that relative or whatever. So, for me, I don't feel like there's anything to hide in a process. So I'm not really bothered about it, but I do understand that there is rules and regulations around how we do or don't do things. The rep has the right to adjourn, so I think we have to remember that as well. So in the first company I worked for, it was quite union heavy, and reps would often adjourn to, speak to the person that was being disciplined or investigated. They're allowed to ask questions, they're allowed to present a case, and they can also answer questions. But one of the things they can't do is give an opinion on a question, which kind of sounds like it contradicts, but they're not allowed to share an opinion on something. So that's quite key. But what I would always say is your company will have their own policy and procedures around representatives. So it's always worth knowing that, because you might have something completely different to everything I've said. The other thing with a representative, I just make sure that there's no conflict of interest. So if you're disciplining one person involved in an incident, I wouldn't have the other person you're disciplining or investigating as a representative. That's just nonsense. The other thing I would say is that, I have seen instances in the first company I worked for where representatives were out to cause trouble, and I would use the opportunity of having the note taker or being the note taker to sort of identify that. So, if we have to question something, that the rep's behavior is not correct or whatever, then I would do so. The first company I worked for, the first union, because there was two unions, the first one, we didn't get on. And I think that person thought that I had something against them. I didn't, so I used to be the trainer there. And as part of the induction, the union used to have a spot. And for some reason, the regional union representative person, he came and he did his, he never used to do the bit. So it used to be someone from the store. Anyway, they did their bit. And for some reason, and I don't know, to this day, they just didn't like the sales pitch. Now, obviously, I don't have no reference point because that was the first time he ever did it, so I wouldn't be able to sort of say, well, it was a style or whatever. But anyway, they allegedly, some of them ripped it up in front of the individual and said no. So for some reason, he thought that I fixed it, and there was a whole big argument, and in the end, he got banned from our location. I can't remember, No, nothing happened for me. So there are instances where you get clashes. For me personally, I don't have a problem with the union. I just have a problem when they are purposely trying to be difficult. So, I've seen union reps actually stand up for the business when there's been a disciplinary and say, actually, you know what, as an employee to the person that's being disciplined, they'll tell them they're doing wrong. I've seen representatives just literally refuse to represent people after hearing some stuff. I remember in the same company I did was it an appeal? I can't remember, I don't even know what it was. It was very early on in my career, but basically the regional manager, the regional HR manager, and I was a note taker, and the hearing went on for 7 hours. Imagine note taking for 7 hours. And I remember there was a question about how much money do you want. I always remember that. And this employee turned around and said something ridiculous, like 137,000 or something. And the union rep just turned around to him and said, look, we discussed what a fair figure was. You're talking complete nonsense. I'm going to go now. And he literally ducked, He literally ducked. He left us there. And this guy had to fend for himself for 3 hours with 2 regional managers. That was a very interesting 3 hours. So yeah, look, you will come across good union reps. They're there to support us. They're there to help us. Recently, I had a case, and the union representative was highlighting. Well, he highlighted one thing that was actually wrong with our documents, and he made it quite clear. He said, he's not using it against us, but he just wanted to highlight this thing. And he said, that's for you to take away and obviously think about what you want to do with it. But this is what it could result in. And that was really fair. That's working in partnership, isn't it? So, good and bad examples of what could happen there. So, rescheduling a meeting. So I've put this in there because this happens quite often. Well, actually, no, that's a lie. This used to happen quite often in the first business I worked for. Purely because of the size of the organization, and people just used to take the fucking piss. That's the reality of it. So look, the thing is to note is that you may need to reschedule. This could be because of the business or the employee. So we have to remember that we operate in a business, and actually sometimes there might be absences from our side in terms of the individual, in terms of the case itself. So, it might be us who have to reschedule it. So I would always make a point to make sure that the employee is told either over the phone or by person by the manager. And then I'd reissue a letter to invite them to the new date. If the employee becomes sick during the process, now this is very contentious, isn't it? So for me personally, if a person becomes sick during a process, then I would still look to complete the process, depending on the illness. So for example, if it's, I don't know. There could be a number of reasons, but for me, one of the ones you get is work-related stress because of a disciplinary. So for me, that disciplinary ain't going away. So I still suggest we do it. And, there are companies who will write to occupational health to get confirmation that they can do it. I'll be honest, in the past, I have not done that. I've just literally invited them and I spoke to them and I said, look, I'm not trying to be funny, but if you want to get better, and this situation isn't going away. It's only ever happened to me twice, I think, and both times we've just gone on ahead with the disciplinary. There may be a time when you suspend someone and they become sick, so it's always worth looking at your company policy. A lot of companies won't pay someone if they become sick during suspension, so just have a look out for that. If you are rescheduling a meeting, always put the reason why. So if it's the employee's request or the business request. If it's because there's no representative, then I think you need to think about what's a reasonable amount of time. And have a look at the case that you have as well. So I've been told that a union rep can be sourced and available within 48 hours in most instances, which seems reasonable. But I think if you've got a disciplinary and the pack is 60 pages long, the person still has, let's say the person's not suspended, so they're still working a job. The person has to find the time to go through 60 pages with an external person. Is 48 hours reasonable enough to do that? So just think about that. The employee may not show up. So that's another reason you may need to reschedule. So a lot of companies will allow for one no-show. I don't, I'll be honest. I make it very clear in my letters that it says this disciplinary will be held in your absence. For me, they got the right of appeal. If they want to appeal, they can appeal. as long as we're ensuring that the person has received the letter. So normally if I'm sending out by post, I would ask for recorded delivery so we can get a signature on it. I'd also send one by first class just in case the person's not home. And Royal Mail don't obviously leave a slip. But nowadays with the email facility, I always ask if they don't mind me sending the documents by email. And what I do is I password protect, so they have to email me to get the password. So once they've done that, I have the assumption that they've got the invite. And actually what I'd do in the first instance anyway in the email is give your hearing will be on at. So it doesn't say what it's for or anything like that. So there's nothing private and confidential in that sense that isn't password protected. But if they've responded to the ask me for your your password, then I can only assume they've had it. The other thing is if someone is a no-show, always ensure a set of notes are taken. So I do have this habit of writing a set of notes that basically says we're here today to investigate to the disciplinary hearing of, these are the allegations, and then I cover what evidence is available and make a decision on each piece of evidence that is used. So I'll literally say, say the CCTV is there. So in the notes I'll say, we've reviewed the CCTV and this is what it shows, and therefore I believe this is founded. So, when the person gets their pack, it's up to them what they do, but there's clear rationale and reason behind a decision that has been taken. You're usually going to get a no-show for a dismissal sort of disciplinary. The other thing is, if the hearing is adjourned, then make sure you confirm that in writing, and obviously make sure you confirm what the next stages are. And I would reissue an invite letter when we reconvene as well. And I'd also give 48 hours notice. And what I do is if there's any new documentation that's been produced as part of the further investigation, then I would also provide that in that disciplinary pack. So again, think about your timescales in terms of when that rescheduled hearing would take place. I've always wanted to do that. I don't know what that's going to sound like, because obviously in the headphones I hear it, but it's not as loud, I guess, as what will be when the actual final thing comes. So, Section 4, meeting location. Now you might think, why have I got a whole section on this? This is actually very important. I found this out very early on. So the first thing I would urge you to do is consider where this room is going to be and who will potentially see the person, going to the disciplinary. So is the room leading on from a canteen? Is the room in a open office? So, you have to walk through a whole office to get to the meeting room, or is it, somewhere where people work? Is there blinds? Oh my God. Is there blinds? Quite often I've seen disciplinaries take place somewhere so open that, the individual you can see is looking over their shoulder. I mean, we always try and get the person to face us away from people. Can people access the room? So the worst thing is, you have a meeting and then you've locked the door, but then some other fucker comes in with their key. I've seen that a few times. You'd be in the middle of a hearing and some fucker just walks in with a load of filing. The size of the room, I think, is quite important. I've literally seen disciplinaries held in rooms so small that there's no table space. There's just the note taker to have table space. I've been in situations where as a note taker I've had to take notes on my laptop on my lap. These are not ideal circumstances. At the end of the day, if that's the case, then take it off site. Think about, is there aircon or heating? I've done disciplinaries where people have been freezing cold and they said, are you doing this to torture me along with my disciplinary. So do think about the heating. Alternatively, I've been in places that have been too hot, like, you're in the middle of summer, and there's like 4 guys in a room, not very big, no aircon, no windows. Because usually your disciplinaries are done in your closets, right? In some regional sort of roles, they don't have, not all sites have the facilities to have proper meetings like this. Think about the closeness to exits. So, if you're going to dismiss someone, you don't, again, want them walking the walk of shame. It's quite obvious when they're escorted out the business. Think about the closeness to facilities like toilets or water fountains or whatever, just in case there is a need for a break. And it's always important to sort of know your surroundings, because when people go missing in the middle of a disciplinary, you kind of know where to look. Well, that's if they're still in the building. If you do a meeting off-site, don't pick the hotel that is the company's hotel where everyone stays overnight anyway, because that's just as fucking bad. If you have a hotel that your company uses and everybody knows that, and they see you as the HR person and they see the regional manager walking into a room with a manager, that usually don't look good. Or you get the, extreme sort of alternative is people think that there's a cull going on and everyone's going to be made redundant that day. So just be mindful of where you do these things. Do not use a McDonald's or a Costa for a disciplinary. I remember when I very first got into a regional role, and I did one of my first disciplinaries there. Now, I was very naive because I'd never been in a regional role, so I didn't know any different. But the regional manager, and it wasn't one of mine to be fair, I was covering someone, but the regional manager actually decided to do a disciplinary hearing in a Costa. This is no lie, in a Costa. I think doing meetings like welfare meetings or something like that in that kind of environment is okay if the person's comfortable with it, because there's no potential outcome. I mean, if it's a welfare visit where there's a potential dismissal, then I would do that on company site or, the old hotel room. Not that kind of hotel room. If you're regional, you know what I mean. But a Costa coffee, imagine we bought the man a hot chocolate. No, I got a hot chocolate. We know I like hot chocolate, but we bought the man a coffee. I don't even know what he ordered. And by the time it got cold, he was cold because he got dismissed. Like, that's fucked up. Imagine that. Like, think about it. Oh, honey, how did your meeting at Costa go? Yeah, I got sacked. What? Like, the man's never going to go Costa again, Or every time he goes to Costa. And this is the thing, like, that regional role, people lived there. Like, he can't go to that retail park again. He done the walk of shame. And then that was bad, man. But I didn't know any different. That was literally one that was bad. If you are holding the meeting off-site, provide a fucking postcode. Like, oh my God. The worst thing is, like, you invite someone to a meeting and the person don't know where to come. You're late because you don't fucking know where you're going. They're late because they don't know where they're going. And the only fucker that knows where they're going is the regional manager or whoever that's just sitting there sort of like, oh, you guys are late. I don't fucking know my way around Harlow. I don't. So, yeah, give proper directions. If it's off-site, again, think about transport, commute, parking. There's a lot of places, these hotels as well, you have to pay for parking, right? So try and cover that shit before the person comes. The last thing you want is to sack someone and then they got to pay £5 for their parking. That's shocking. The other thing is now that we've moved into this world, and I'll be honest, I've been using Microsoft Teams way before COVID-19 to do disciplinaries that were non-dismissals. So I'm kind of glad in a way that, remote working is so much more accepted. I remember the first disciplinary I did remotely via a laptop. That was maybe 2018. It was so frowned upon. Well, I just did it anyway. I wasn't driving all the way to Leeds for what was going to be a 15-minute disciplinary. Let's think about the fuel and let's think about the company expenses. The other thing to say is if you're taking a meeting off-site, So this is coming back to the Costa scenario. Make sure the internet is easy to access, because sometimes you might need to get more proof. Now, obviously, you don't want to do it at Costa. We've said that. But sometimes these hotels, the internet ain't good, and they don't always give you a wire. So just be mindful of those things when you're thinking about facilities. If you're off-site, you also want to know restroom areas, all those kind of things. You want to almost do the sort of check-in thing to the disciplinary. I was so tempted to try and do a different beat, but I thought that's just really immature. So the next section is called Who's Recording? So, the old myth of voice recordings. So, check the policy around recording, because some businesses allow they do their own recordings. I do know of businesses that have their own audio recordings anyway. A lot of companies don't allow it. Obviously, you need to check in with GDPR as well in terms of if you are recording. But if an individual has recorded you without making you aware, there's this perception that won't be admissible. Oh, sorry, that is admissible. Like that's not going to be referenced. Well, I've heard that it can be. So with me, when we do the meetings, I always sort of brief my manager to behave in a way and ask questions in a way and format in a way that they are being recorded. Because you never know, yeah? Let's just put it out there. You don't know, even if you say you're not to be recorded, you don't know if you are being recorded. Like there's so many times when I've been in disciplinaries and I've often thought to myself, why is that phone located there? Like, you can ask people to switch their phones off, but you don't know if someone else has got a phone, like, in their coat pocket or whatever, You don't know how many phones a person has. You don't even know if they have an actual recording device. So always be mindful that you may be being recorded. If you do record audios, then obviously copies need to be provided to the employee and the rep as well. But yeah, the other thing to be mindful of as well is that there's not just mobile phones. Sometimes people come with their laptops or their iPads, devices that they use. And again, if the screen is locked, for all you know, there could be a recording taking place. And therefore, be mindful, now that we're on remote working, if you're doing a disciplinary, the end user may be recording the meeting as well. So you can't necessarily see their screen. So think about the body language, think about how you're saying things. You don't know if, like I say, you could be getting recorded on video. So yeah. So Section 6. That was a very small Section 5, wasn't it? Section 6, note taking. So, who should source the note taker? The old debate. Is it HR? Is it the leadership team? Who is it? Well, first of all, check your policy. That will tell you who it is. But for me, I don't have a problem with HR sourcing a note taker, because we probably see the notes that come through. A manager might not. So be mindful of that. This whole thing about HR having to be note takers, however, I don't agree with. So for me, unless a case is going to be a final written warning, well, even then, I don't think at a final written I would be too bothered. But I know where I am now, you do have to have a member of HRs in the policy. But for me, unless there's a dismissal, I think any note taker can be note taker. Because again, you got the right of appeal. You got to ask them to sign the notes. If there needs to be amends to the notes, there'll be amends. If the appeal hearing gets it and there's a problem with the notes, that will come up. So I think as long as you're fluid, there's no problem. I think the difficulty is when people try to be pristine note takers. I'm quite lucky. My notes are pretty... Actually, you know what? There may be people that work with me here and might be thinking, no, it's not. I would say my notes are okay. My notes are a lot better now. You'd like my notes if you saw them. Bullet points and everything. But anyway, I'm not bothered. I mean, I've seen HR people actually complain about full stops and commas and capitals and all this kind of stuff. Like, the note-taking isn't supposed to be a novel. It's supposed to be a reflection of the meeting and what was said. Now, I had heard very, very early on in my career that a set of the notes that I used was actually used in a tribunal. Not one that I was actually a part of, but a set of my notes was. And there was comments about the notes. And in those days, we used to handwrite them. So ever since then, I actually don't know what the feedback was, by the way. I assume it wasn't that bad because I was still the main note taker. But yeah, I type all my notes after that. And I make a point to actually do my notes straight after the meeting. So if I have to do the old tidy up, I would not necessarily make pressure on myself to have the notes finished by the end of the meeting, or, if there's a dismissal, you don't want them waiting around for 20 minutes while you tidy up your notes, do you? That's just ridiculous. So I always take an email address and I forward them on. There is the issue of what if the person doesn't have a scanner. So for me, I've sent the email. They can reply by their named email back. You record the email address that they give you on the notes. And in the notes. And then for me, if they confirm by the email that these notes are acceptable, I always ask them to send the same copy, like a copy of the notes with that email, so it's attached as well. And that's the one I'll save to file. I save the email. To me, jobs are good. And, people have e-signatures, Do you know how many times I've used e-signatures now? So I haven't signed anything. Can't remember the last time I used a pen to sign anything. So does that mean I signed or I didn't sign? That's what you need to think about. If someone refuses to sign the notes, then that's fine. I'll give you the opportunity to amend it. If you don't want to amend it, I'll write on there that you had the opportunity to amend it. You didn't want to amend it. I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit blasé about that, but that's how I sit with it. We're all adults. If the note taker is struggling and you see the note taker struggling, or you're the note taker and you're struggling, say something. Don't just keep going, because it becomes a whirlwind. And, sometimes having that stop, it makes it easier for you to remember what was said at those times. So, I'll be honest, yes, my notes are okay. I get the gist of what I've written from the notes, but there are times when I talk and I can't type and talk. So I just literally put 4 words about what the topic was, and then I'll write the paragraph because I know my sort of delivery style. If you need something repeated, ask them to repeat it. I'd rather annoy someone and get it right rather than get it wrong. You need to ensure that the note taker that's assigned is not known as like the world's biggest mouth. I see note takers who just come out and like spill the beans. Have you seen Batman and the Joker? Squeal. Bare squealers around, So you don't want none of that. The old question of if the meeting is not formal. So if a meeting is not formal, or it ends in let's stay with the meeting is not formal. I'm just going to cover it off because this is the most I've talked about notes. Then I just do bullet points, action. No, sorry. Point, action, point, action, point, action. So I like to, when I say something's not formal, I don't want to whack out the notes template. I prefer to just have it sort of backed up in an email or something like that. Make sure if you're a note taker, and that's your designated role, you don't start passing off opinion. Because sometimes there might be, you're just there as the note taker, and there might be another HR person or another manager as the sort of, you might have another HR person as the sort of business representative, the manager doing the questioning. So it might be HR and the manager doing it, and then you're the third sort of business person in the room. If you are, don't fucking say shit. Let us do our thing. Yeah. So here we are at the disciplinary meeting. So we spoke about sort of preparation and getting your questions ready, etc. So I'm not going to cover all that again. But if we put it through an easy sort of how does it work, you've got your introduction. So your introduction will always be on a template. make sure that introduction is said. It doesn't have to be word for word, but make sure the key points are said. You know how many times I see disciplinary start and the offer of a rep hasn't been mentioned, and you haven't asked if they're happy to continue without one? That is the number one thing that gets missed. Or the allegations just blasé through. So if you see that as HR, make sure you kind of acknowledge to the manager that that's the case. I mean, I know I said not to say anything, but if it's just you and the manager, I would at that point say, actually, there's just a couple of bits I want to revisit. And then I would cover it myself or give the manager the opportunity to do so. If I've done it myself, in the notes, I will reflect that I said those bits. It's then about presenting the evidence. So one of the first things I do, though, after we've gone through the introductions, is I've asked if they've received the pack and if there's anything that is new to them. Because you might not necessarily, well, you kind of do know. I guess you do know. But is there anything new that they wish to discuss with the pack in terms of just the content? And I always ask them about the notes. So have they had a chance to review all of the notes? And is there anything that they think is inaccurate or whatever? And then I just record their answer. Just as a sort of, cover piece. Once you've gone through that, you'd then be, for me, asking for the employee's version of events, so letting them talk through it. Now, they may answer half of your questions in doing so, which is a win-win for me. But if they don't, then it's about presenting those questions that you've written, asking them and getting the answers. And for me, if your line of question is correct, then you would end up with what you need. If you don't, then I think it's about reverting back to the evidence that you have and using that. So, for example, if someone says, I wasn't quite sure what to do, I'd then be saying, well, this is your training from last month in which you've signed. So do you want to just talk me through what part of it you don't understand? Or it might be, in your investigation, I've seen that you actually explained the whole process. So why did you choose not to apply it this time? So there's a bit of that. And then following on from that, if they haven't already, I always ask, well, actually, even if they have, I always ask, is there any mitigation in or outside of work that needs to be considered? So it's just, I think that is important. Like, if someone's going through some shit and that's maybe behind what they've done, then it's important to know that. Because sometimes the employee will try and deal with things on their own without going to a manager, or maybe for whatever reason they don't feel comfortable raising it. So give that opportunity. But what I always say is that think about, in the adjournment, you need to be thinking about how you're going to respond to that mitigation. Because you can't just let it, you can't just boss it off, you have to say something. So once you've done that and you're satisfied you've asked all the questions you can, I then adjourn. I give them the opportunity to say anything before we adjourn or anything that they want us to consider. So that's not just mitigation, that's just anything that they want us to consider. Now, in the adjournment, I'm going to come to that in the next part. But you then come back and you talk about what the next steps are. So the next steps might be that you're going to have to adjourn again for further investigation based on what's been said. The outcome may be no formal action. But then the outcome could be one of the following. So, could be a caution letter. You may deem that the incident, has maybe been blown out of proportion and the caution letter is acceptable. Maybe a verbal warning if you have a verbal warning. I don't know if a lot of companies do anymore. Written warning, final written warning, and then you can have either a dismissal or a summary dismissal. So just to clarify, summary dismissal is an immediate dismissal, so all company benefits and pay stop on the day of dismissal. If there's any future... Actually, let me go through. Have I got this covered? Oh, I've already got... Okay, right, so there's a different section on this. So let's just stop right there and go on to the next section. So... the controversial part of a disciplinary, the bit where we do our side hustle, the bit where you have to listen to everyone's fucking opinion, and then you have to undo that opinion and make things right. The adjournment. Man, I love an adjournment. The adjournment should be, it's a salesman's job. You need to be a salesman. You need a hustle for this. I don't mind that. I'm quite seasoned at it. But the adjournment can be very difficult when you're first, in a big case or something like that. And adjournments can go on, Like, I've been in adjournments that have taken 3 hours, 4 hours. Person must be thinking I'm hungry by now. Adjournments are unnecessarily difficult. So I'm going to read through my notes as they are, because I think I can get really carried away with this. So, ensure the... and then I've said, the first thing I said is, ensure the adjournment is not too short. Avoid predetermined. Now that is very important. I've been in disciplinaries where the adjournment's been 5 minutes. These are my early days. Of course you didn't talk about it. You know you didn't talk about it. The person who got the sanction knows you didn't talk about it. I use it as a chance to tidy up my notes. That's what I do in the sort of first instance. I tidy up my notes. It just makes it easier. I also, in terms of the notes in the adjournment, I will type out what the decision is, the reason, and things like that. It just makes it easier to script as well. There are quite a few managers who will script it themselves, though, so that's really cool as well. So when you've got that, all you have to do is type out whatever they've said ahead of going back into the room. Ensure you challenge the manager on the choice of the outcome. That is our job. Yeah, our job for me is not to just sit there and watch them make a stupid mistake because, we're too scared or whatever. Now, if you've made your point and they decide to go against what you advise, then that's the instance where I'll be saying, that's cool, but this is what I advise. And that's quite important. I mean, look, there are times when the manager's going to be phoning someone else to get their opinion on something, which I think is absolutely fucking disgusting. I think we should just be able to go through a meeting and it should be the decision of the person holding the meeting. When you're writing the outcome, you need to explain the reason, and it has to be linked to each allegation. So the reason behind each allegation. Highlight the concerns that you have and the required improvement if they're not being dismissed. You can also, in the adjournment, so I have at times when something new has come to light, I've cross-checked it, so I've phoned up individuals and taken over-the-phone statements. Because I think sometimes it's not about adjourning it and making it go on forever. You can check the systems or the emails, so if something's been said that you need to counter-check or you didn't have an awareness of, then check it. That's what the adjournment's there for. Review the evidence that has been provided in conjunction with what you had previously as well. So sometimes you might look at it side by side and actually see that there's a different problem here. And the outcome may not be as clear as you think. And you need to think about that. And if there's going to be a corrective action or an action to take away, you need to think about that as well. What is the right action? If you need to, go back after adjournment and ask further questions, because when you review the notes and you review the evidence and stuff, you may see different things. Sometimes when you're in the middle of a disciplinary, you don't get the opportunity to think about everything that's being said. So that's partly why I tidy up the notes first as well. But you can always use it in an opportunity to go back and ask further questions or ask further clarity. And sometimes, one of the activities I have with managers, so, sometimes we get about 3 or 4 allegations. And I do the old tick exercise. So, allegation 1, yes or no, tick. Allegation 2, yes or no, no. Allegation 3, yes or no, yes. Allegation 4, yes or no, yes. And then it's obviously the severity of those allegations. So, if it's a gross misconduct and you've ticked 3 out of 4, thanks for popping in. If it's a misconduct and you've ticked 1 out of 4, that might determine what level of sanction you give. I mean, if it's not gross misconduct, you can't give a final written warning unless there's a first written anyway. But I think sometimes you'd be thinking about, is it even a first written warning? One of the things I think a lot of disciplinaries kind of show is a lack of management. You can see that through there, and you're sitting there, you're thinking, Well, how have we even got to this place? Especially for misconduct, right? How have we even got here? How have we allowed this to happen? A gross misconduct is clear cut, Well, it's not clear cut, but if it's theft or something, that's not a management. Well, you say that, it could be the manager, to be fair. But my point is that a gross misconduct is much more sort of, not solid, but you kind of know where you stand. Whereas misconducts, I just don't get it sometimes. 9 times out of 10, for me, if they haven't had an informal discussion, or caution letter, or file note, whatever you want to call it, then why have we not done that? I mean, 9 times out of 10, they've never even had an actual conversation about the thing. So just be mindful of that, And the other thing is, and this might be the shocker for you, I've been in gross misconduct disciplinaries that have ended up in file notes, because it's been swearing or aggression or whatever. And actually, you find out that the manager did the same thing 2 days before. So I say to the manager, should I invite you into the meeting and discipline you as well? No, Mr. HR. Right, so what is a fair outcome? And actually, is there an education piece? So, you need to think about these things. The other thing is, think about the individual's length of service, their record. Is it clean? If someone's had no issues and they're being disciplined for something around misconduct, I mean, it couldn't even be gross misconduct, but when you actually look at it, it's happened as gross misconduct because of the severity of the issue, but actually they've not purposely done anything wrong. What do? Does that person get dismissed? Does that person get a final written warning? I mean, I've had that. I've had an incident where the act itself was very severe, but when you broke it down, the person never was supposed to be doing that activity, and they were forced into doing that activity because of a lack of process and procedure somewhere else. So should that person get the sack? The question is, why did the individual not raise it as a concern? But then, if you're trying to embed a culture of, not freedom, that's the wrong word, but if you're trying to encourage a culture where people think for themselves and act on things, he didn't do anything wrong. So there's these kind of things to think about when you're in that adjournment. Now, the one thing that does absolutely piss me off, and it more happens in appeals, to be fair, but you will get you have to run your decision by someone. Fuck that. And I know, look, I'm not even going to try and sit here and say that I can just do whatever I want. We all end up having to conform to it, but it's fucking, you know what, if there's directors or whatever, don't allow that in your business, man. Like, that's one thing I'm going to say from now. And people might say, well, it's easy for you to say you've never been a director. I'm not fucking doing it. I will not tolerate it, and I made that very clear. This thing of having to run it by. No, it's the why even have the disciplinary team then? What's the point? So yeah, I think that's enough on the adjournment. So this is the last No, it's not. Oh my God, there's 2 more parts. I thought, right, we're going to have to whiz through this. So the outcome. So I've kind of just touched on it. Ensure that the person hearing the meeting is the one that is giving the outcome. Make sure they understand the outcome and make sure they're actually able to articulate the outcome. That's quite important as well. If you script it and they don't know what the hell you're talking about, then that's not going to look good. Use the notes. Now, some companies do have a process where they take notes during the adjournment as well. I've never done this, so if I'm supposed to, someone needs to tell me that now because I've not done it for 15 years and I've never been asked to provide it. But yeah, that's the thing. So use your notes from there. Ensure that the person receiving the outcome has the opportunity to question anything after the adjournment or raise anything. So I always make sure I do that. Following the adjournment, is there anything you wish to add or anything you want to say? By the way, I realize I'm talking like I do disciplinaries myself. I've been a manager, so I think that's what's happening here. I'm talking in the wrong tense. But you get it, right? As HR, at least if you get the behind the psychology of it, you can maybe understand it and implement it. But anyway, give them the opportunity. The next thing I do is I go via each allegation and I cover the findings. So like what I said in the notes of founded or unfounded. And then I will go to, therefore, our decision is, and then you explain why. You tell them what the outcome is. You tell them any terms and conditions. So for example, in a lot of places, if you get a final written warning, it stays on file for 12 months. You will be exempt from a pay rise, you'll be exempt from a bonus, etc., etc. Make sure that that is covered if there's anything on there. I mean, it comes out in the letter, but you don't want someone to read that on the letter. You'd rather tell them that in person. They may have some questions and stuff like that. Explain that they do have the right of appeal. So this is if you're given a sanction, obviously. Not if they've been given a file note, though. Let's just be clear on that. I think the thing to explain is that with the appeal, they'll have to outline their grounds for appeal. So it can't just be, I don't think this is right. They'll have to explain why they don't think it's right. And I guess this is for the appeal meeting, but it is their job to actually provide the evidence and present the case in the appeal. It's not yours. And the other thing is to explain that in a lot of companies, the decision can be up to level. So if someone got a final written warning, potentially they could be dismissed, or it could be brought down a level. So it's important that people understand that as well. And if you're given an action or an expectation, so outline what that expectation is, when you expect to see that take place, and obviously what support or what process you expect them to complete. And that is the outcome. So, the last part of the disciplinary, after the meeting. So let's get the crappy stuff out of the way. If it's a dismissal, you need to allow them to collect their personal belongings. You need to collect, their site-specific items, so things like security passes, keys, etc. Be mindful if this is a manager that you're sacking who is responsible for the building, you'll have to think about who's going to sort of close off that day. I know that sounds like a very straightforward thing, but it's not always. And then obviously you need to make sure that you get any passwords for any company property like mobile phones, laptops, etc. The amount of times I see iPhones just sitting there waiting for a password, it's ridiculous. You know, there's many people that could do with new iPhones. I could do with a new iPhone. Understand that, you know, if it's not a dismissal, so say someone's got a final written warning, the employee may become reserved. They may for a period of time be scarred by what has happened. And that's perfectly reasonable. You know, I've never received a final written warning, but I have got a first written warning. And maybe for about all of 75 minutes, I did kind of think differently. But people do. People start, you know, thinking about what happens if I get the next sanction or whatever. So, you know, there's a bit of that. But on the flip side of that, the employee should understand what they've done, and they should understand why they've received the sanction. So it's quite interesting as a HR person. I've seen many people think that they're going to get the sack. Like many people think they're going to get the sack. And I think that just shows how wrong a company culture can be perceived at times. You know, that could be if it's a positive culture as well, you know. Like, I'm not just saying that means it's a negative culture. That could be from something that's seen as a positive culture. So we have to be mindful that when you're talking about the sanction, you're that clear that it's to the point about the actual incident itself and why the severity is there. I'll be honest, I'm quite fortunate people understand their sanctions coming out of mine. I've had people that have been dismissed that have said thank you. So, there may be a change. So you may, as part of your sanction, do a demotion or change the team or remove an activity or something. So you need to make sure that that's explained and covered as well. And if there is a change like that, you know, there has to be a discussion around that person's team, the team they go into, etc. You know, there's going to be a bit of If someone gets demoted and they're no longer someone's not accessing them as a team leader, as an example, it's going to be fairly obvious that that person's been demoted. So there has to be some sort of communication around how that is shared with the wider audience. If there's no action and as a consequence there's a learning to be shared, make sure that learning is shared. So if you have the facility of town halls or whatever, internal comms, whatever it might look like, especially if it's a process thing or something like that, make sure it's briefed out. And if there's a training piece, make sure that training happens ASAP. Because the last thing you need is you then go down a route of disciplining someone and it's the exact same fucking thing that someone had last time. Because that's the other thing. We're not operational people. So someone might call it this and someone might call it that. And it could be the complete same thing. You just wouldn't know. So be mindful of that. And if there is an action, make sure that you as HR are following up on it and even be a part of it. There is an opportunity there as well to get involved. If the outcome results to a change of role or location, then you need to ensure that that happens smoothly. The receiver needs to understand it as well, because I think one of the things I don't really like is when a disciplinary happens and, there's a vacancy somewhere, so somebody just ends up going somewhere, but nobody's actually checked in with that manager to see how that's going to work for them as well. So, if that's the case, I would usually have some sort of steer of it after seeing the investigation pack, to be fair, so maybe I've already put things in motion. As HR, you'll know sort of what you can or can't do, where people can or can't go, what managers may or may not be an issue. So, there is that check-in process as well. And then I think, if you're given actions, make sure that we're checking in on those actions. Just make sure that the manager is on top of it. So, you'll probably have like manager review meetings or whatever you have weekly or whatever. Just make sure it's on the agenda. You'll have some sort of case log or something. So just make sure you're reviewing it on a, periodic basis. So in my previous role, I used to review it on the last Friday of every month because I used to have Monday meetings with the senior team. So that just made sense, right? I already had my agenda items and all that. And the other thing is, this is the last piece, if there has been a sanction or there has been some sort of incident and it's not seen as a positive one, then what I would do is say, where there's improvements, acknowledge those improvements. Because for me, a disciplinary is seen as a corrective measure, not a punitive measure. And so if something has been corrected and as a consequence something has got better, or an individual has got better, or whatever that looks like, then celebrate that. It doesn't have to be like, I guess there's a thing here. When I say celebrate, I don't mean go and have a party, but, let that person know. And if it is something that's really drastically improved, then yes, maybe they do need to be considered for some sort of mention or, thank you or whatever that looks like in your organization. Because I do welcome when people actively try to be better and they actively try to do better. They take their learning and they apply it and there's an improvement. So yeah, celebrate. So that's the end of the disciplinary one. And we are nearing the end of season 2. So there's still episodes 8, 9, and 10 to record. Episode 8 will be recorded tomorrow. I'm still on this spree of recording. I've actually got toothache, so it's quite difficult today, actually. And this podcast has gone on, so I'm going to sign out. But as usual, as I always say, if you've got any questions, feedback, anything that you need to correct from what you've heard, please do so. Do remember this is my experiences and my sharings. And I hope, so far you're getting stuff out of it. This is all free. Not charging for this. This is all going to be out there. And so far I've not seen anything like this. So, once we finish season 2, I'm going to be looking at, is there a season 3 this year? There's other things I want to work on in terms of the brand. I do want to rebrand. I want to redo the music. It's annoying me now. There's quite a few things. So I've got a busy sort of Q1, Q2 as well, work-wise. So after season 2, not quite sure when the next season will be there. I'll be honest with you, I'm trying to finish season 2 so I can start scripting season 3 ahead of my busy period. But I'm suspecting that season 3 probably won't be recorded for some time. But there may be quality differences in the product itself. There may even be a product itself. So let's see. So look, enjoy. Thanks for listening again, and catch you next time.